Today we're covering a disease outbreak spreading across Central Europe that has officials deeply worried, a climate ultimatum that demands over $1 trillion, Britain's immigration crisis forcing dramatic policy reversals, historical debts coming due across multiple continents, energy deals that reshape European dependency, and escalating tensions in East Asia that could trigger American military intervention. But the story I've saved for last, the one that reveals something profound about where our culture is heading, that's coming at the very end. I spent years inside one of those big establishment media operations, the kind with marble lobbies and mission statements about truth. I watched editors spike stories that contradicted preferred narratives, watched producers massage facts until they fit the template. Eventually, I realized I had a choice: stay and compromise everything I believed in, or walk away and speak freely. I chose freedom. Now I work for you, I answer to you, and I tell you what actually matters, not what some corporate board wants you to think. Before we go further, I need your help. Hit that like button, subscribe if you haven't already, because this kind of independent journalism doesn't fund itself. We spend hours fact-checking, verifying sources, making sure we're not feeding you misinformation like so many outlets do. If you value that work, if you want to keep this channel alive and growing, please consider becoming a sponsor. It's personal for me knowing that real people believe in what we're building here. And I promise you, stick around until the end, because the final story is the one that ties everything together in ways you won't expect. Right now, across the Czech Republic, something alarming is unfolding. Health authorities have confirmed hundreds of hepatitis cases, and tragically, several people have already lost their lives. The situation is particularly acute near the German border and in Prague itself. One popular winter resort took to social media with an urgent message: the epidemiological situation is deteriorating. Karlovy Vary, that famous spa town, is seeing case numbers climb. Officials are responding with visible urgency, installing hand sanitizer dispensers throughout Prague's public transit system, increasing the frequency of handrail disinfection, treating this like the serious public health emergency it is. Germany's Robert Koch Institute in Berlin has issued statements confirming that Czech health authorities have already notified all European community nations through the European Centre for Disease Prevention and Control. But here's where things get even more complicated. The Czech Republic isn't just dealing with hepatitis, they're simultaneously battling a massive bird flu outbreak, and I mean massive. Tens of thousands of birds are being culled. The operation involves Czech police, veterinary administration personnel, employees from private companies, even prison inmates have been mobilized for this effort, and the Czech Republic isn't alone. Bird flu outbreaks are being reported across multiple European Union countries. Farmers in affected regions have been ordered to keep their poultry indoors, completely isolated from any contact with wild birds. You're watching two separate disease emergencies unfold simultaneously in the heart of Europe, and if you think that's just coincidence, just unfortunate timing, wait until you hear what certain political figures are saying needs to happen next, because this is where public health crisis meets climate, politics meets demands for absolutely staggering amounts of money. Enter Annalena Baerbock, Germany's foreign minister, who has now apparently added climate catastrophism to her portfolio. Speaking at the United Nations General Assembly, Baerbock declared that nearly half the world's population faces serious danger. She called climate change the greatest threat of our time, emphasizing that nearly half of Earth's inhabitants are at risk, and then, predictably, inevitably, came the demand for more money. Much more money. Baerbock called for annual investments of $1.3 trillion, trillion with a T, for climate protection. These funds, she specified, must include not just government spending, but private investment as well. In other words, everyone needs to pay: governments, corporations, individuals, everyone. The pattern is becoming impossible to ignore. Crisis after crisis, emergency after emergency, and the solution is always the same: transfer massive amounts of wealth, expand government control, and trust that the people demanding the money will spend it wisely. But before we get too deep into European dysfunction, let me remind you to hit that subscribe button, because we're just getting started, and what's coming next shows how political pressure can force even the most ideologically committed governments to reverse course completely. The Keir Starmer government in Britain is hemorrhaging public support at a rate that has to terrify Labour strategists. Popular anger is building like nothing we've seen in recent memory. And now, faced with political annihilation, Starmer's government is pivoting hard on immigration, specifically targeting illegal channel crossings by small boats. They have no choice anymore. The right-wing Reform UK party has absolutely exploded in popularity by making immigration the central issue of British politics, and they've successfully forced the ruling Labour Party into adopting much tougher positions on illegal border crossings. According to recent British polling, illegal immigration is now the #1 concern among voters, surpassing everything else. So now we watch and see whether Labour can actually deliver on this dramatic policy shift, or whether it's just election year posturing. But that's not the only pressure Britain is facing. 15 Caribbean nations, plus multiple African countries, are aggressively demanding reparations from Britain for what they describe as unacceptable actions committed between the 15th and 19th centuries, actions that affected, by their calculations, over 12.5 million people. They've done the math, they've prepared their arguments, and they're not backing down. Most European leaders are flatly opposed to even discussing this topic, arguing that modern states and institutions shouldn't bear responsibility for historical injustices committed centuries ago. Prime Minister Keir Starmer, speaking at the Commonwealth Summit in Samoa, made his position clear. He prefers looking forward rather than engaging in endless discussions about reparations for the past. Let's focus on the future and work towards something better. That was Starmer's message. But here's what makes this particularly interesting. This isn't just about Britain. Fresh polling from Poland's State Public Opinion Institute shows that 63% of Poles want Germany to pay more reparations for damages caused during World War II. That's up 5 percentage points from just 2 years ago. The number of Poles demanding German reparations is actually growing. Germany consistently rejects these demands, claiming the matter is legally settled. Current Polish President Andrzej Duda has raised this issue repeatedly, but German President Frank-Walter Steinmeier reaffirmed Germany's position that reparations are completely closed as a topic. You see the pattern here? Historical grievances, real or manufactured, are being weaponized as political tools and financial pressure mechanisms. Every nation that once held power is now being presented with bills for past actions, and every government is scrambling to figure out how to respond without opening floodgates they can never close. But if you think demands for money stop with reparations, you haven't been paying attention to what the European Union is planning. The EU budget for 2026 shows massive increases, hundreds of millions of euros in additional spending on security, defense, migration, and border management. Both the European Parliament and European Council have already reached agreement on this. These aren't small adjustments. These are fundamental shifts in how Europe allocates resources, and it's happening against a backdrop of economic stagnation and political fragmentation. Meanwhile, the European Commission has thrown its support behind United States plans for gas extraction in the Mediterranean Sea. The explanation offered to European citizens is that cooperation with partners like the United States will help Europe finally break free from Russian gas dependency. The United States was, is, and will remain a key, reliable energy partner for the European Union. That's the official line from the European Commission, and just recently, US officials completed tours through various European countries specifically to promote American energy products. Mission accomplished. Apparently, Europe is locking itself into long-term dependency on American energy, and they're calling it independence. But let's shift our attention to East Asia, where tensions are escalating rapidly. Relations between China and Japan have sharply deteriorated since Sanae Takaichi became Japan's first female prime minister. Recently, Takaichi stated that a potential Chinese invasion of Taiwan would create a threat to Japan itself, and that would permit Japan to exercise its right to collective defense and call on the United States for assistance. Beijing's response was immediate and severe. China's foreign ministry summoned the Japanese ambassador and demanded that the prime minister's outrageous statements be withdrawn. China's Ministry of Defense went further, threatening Japan with military defeat if Tokyo interferes in Taiwan matters. And then, just to emphasize the point, Chinese Coast Guard vessels entered waters around the Senkaku Islands, which are controlled by Japan. The Coast Guard claimed the patrol was necessary to protect Chinese rights. Every move here is calculated to increase pressure, to test resolve, to see who blinks first. These aren't just diplomatic protests. These are the preliminary moves in a potential military confrontation that would involve the world's largest economies and most powerful militaries. Now let's turn to something happening inside the United States that reveals where progressive politics is heading in major American cities. Seattle just elected a socialist mayor. Democrat Kathy Wilson defeated her more moderate party colleague Bruce Harrell. Wilson, a local activist, is campaigning on increased taxes for large corporations and harsh criticism of corporate activity. Sound familiar? It should, because she's following the exact same playbook as the New York City mayor, who's backed by billionaire George Soros. Same agenda, same rhetoric, same policies being promoted everywhere simultaneously. Immediately after winning the election, Wilson joined a Starbucks workers' strike and called for a boycott of the corporation. Here's what's going to happen, and you can set your watch by this. Major companies and wealthy individuals will leave these cities. No one is going to stick around to satisfy the demands of these progressive figureheads, to put it simply. And gradually, inevitably, these cities will decline. Tax base shrinks, services deteriorate, crime increases, and the people who voted for these policies will wonder what went wrong. But let's set aside all the heavy geopolitical and economic dysfunction for a moment, because there's something genuinely fascinating happening in entertainment that tells us a lot about where culture is heading. Sony, whose film studio is based in the United States and considered part of Hollywood, has decided to make an Alubu movie. They figured out that if Barbie and Lego can generate billions of dollars, then it's time to adapt everything sitting on collectors' shelves, everything that millions of people around the world treat as objects of devotion and nostalgia. Nobody knows yet whether this will be animated, live action, or maybe a 3-hour art house experiment where the Alubu stares philosophically into emptiness, but the irony is impossible to miss. Films used to inspire toy creation. Now toys dictate what gets filmed. Soon we'll see Alubu, the beginning in theaters, then maybe Alubu versus Barbie, or Alubu in the multiverse, and the devotion to Alubu will only intensify. This is the world we live in now, where intellectual property from childhood becomes the foundation of billion-dollar franchises, where nostalgia is the most valuable commodity in entertainment. So there you have it. Disease outbreaks spreading across Europe while officials install hand sanitizer dispensers and debate trillion-dollar climate programs, Britain reversing its immigration policies under political pressure while former colonies demand payment for centuries-old grievances. Poland wants German money, the Caribbean wants British money, everyone wants someone else to pay for history. The EU increases defense spending while locking in American energy dependency. China and Japan edge closer to confrontation over Taiwan. American cities elect socialists who promise to tax corporations into submission, and Hollywood turns collectible toys into cinematic universes. These aren't separate stories, they're all symptoms of the same underlying crisis: institutions that no longer function, governments that can't deliver solutions, populations that don't trust their leaders, and a culture that increasingly retreats into childhood nostalgia because the present is too dysfunctional to face directly. If this kind of analysis matters to you, if you want to keep seeing connections that mainstream media won't show you, hit that like button, subscribe, and seriously consider sponsoring this channel. This is independent journalism, which means it survives only if you support it. I'll be back tomorrow with more, and I hope the news is better. Until then, take care of yourselves.